Question, who's going to grab the bull by the horn?
Who's going to grab that brass ring?
Who's going to step up to the plate and hit a home run?
No more cliches.
Oh, well, it's the wrong sport anyway. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to MLSnet.com's Extra Time. I'm your host, Greg Lalas. This is Shep messing, and this week we're talking about all the teams that just seem to be letting their destiny slip away, a.k.a. choking. We're also going to look at the Ricardo Clark, Carlos Ruiz debacle down in Dallas and talk to Dr. Joe Machnick, the MLS disciplinary guru, if you will, about possible suspensions for both players. And lastly, we're going to look at Los Angeles. Are they for real? They've won 3 in a row. I think you might be on the bandwagon now.
I like the t-shirt and logo. I'm jumping on their bandwagon.
Well, let's see. Well. They're still out of the playoffs for now, but some other teams that had a chance to get into the playoffs really didn't do it. They didn't step up. New York, they come up with a draw against Real Salt Lake. Kansas City loses to LA. Columbus had a chance to actually get into that 8th and final spot, and they lost to LA at home. What's going on?
Let's talk about it, Greg, because each of those teams failed to really make a mark when they had the opportunity to grab some points. New York, it's just poor when you're playing at home against a bad Real Salt Lake team and you give up 2 goals. If you're going to allow goals like that at home, you're not going to do much when you get to the playoffs anyway. Claudio Reyna, he got hurt, came out of the game, so who knows? I don't think the future bodes as well for New York as I thought it was last week.
Well, I think New York is definitely in, but you're right, they're not playing very well. Another team, though, Colorado, they went up to New England and they let a late goal from Cano Smith beat them. They did very well for 80 minutes looking for that 0-0 result, which they came out to play for, and then it fell apart.
Yeah, I've been a fan of Bunakondul and the way they've organized themselves on the defensive side of the ball, but that's just Colorado's on the outside looking in. They have to scrap for points. Not a good effort.
Yeah, they don't have very much going forward, and we have to talk about Columbus. They gave it away. They had a chance. They really had a chance to jump ahead of Chicago for that 8th spot, and they gave it away.
I've been pushing those yellow bumblebees. I really have. I think Siggy Schmidt did a great job. Scalotto, he's out of the lineup, but these are not mistakes by inexperienced players. Columbus got the early goal, and then Frankie Hayduck, 2 mistakes. They lose 2-1. Catastrophic.
Yeah, well, it's really important right now for all these teams to step up with all the pressure that they have on them. I mean, it really comes down to who can handle the pressure. It's going to be a great final couple of weeks of the league, and the format's great. Teams are fighting for this playoffs. It's going to be very interesting to see who gets in coming down to the wire. The playoff team that is spiraling most out of control right now is FC Dallas. What is going wrong in the Big D? They took a 3-0 drubbing to the Houston Dynamo this past weekend. They're 1-5-1 in their last 7 games. And with the red card this past weekend, Carlos Ruiz is out at least 2 games, most likely more. They do have the Open Cup final on Wednesday, but things are just not going right when they need to. So, Shep, question comes up. What's going wrong down there?
Greg, we talked about this big player, designated player rule in Major League Soccer forever. It's a big gamble. It really is, because you either mold together a team of guys that are really on the same page, or you go out and get a Juan Pablo Angel or Claudio Reyna or David Beckham or Blanco, and you hope they're not only great players, but they're character guys as well. And I think that's where it all started to go wrong for Dallas. I'm not questioning Danielson's skill on the ball. He has skill on the ball. But I'm convinced that if Stevie Morrow got to know this guy really well for a 2 or 3 week period, I don't think he would have brought him to the team.
Well, obviously the real story down there, besides the loss, was the Carlos Ruiz, Ricardo Clark incident, if you will. Ricardo Clark basically kicking Carlos Ruiz when he's on the ground. Put on the commissioner's suit for a minute. What would you do in this situation?
It's a violent game. Players lose their temper. Having said that, normally I'd forgive Ricardo Clark, but in this case I don't. I think the cowardice nature of kicking full force Carlos Ruiz when he's lying on the ground looking the other way, I'd kick him out for a year.
So we're now joined by Dr. Joe Machnick, Assistant to the Deputy Commissioner for On-Field Competition. Dr. Mack, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
So the first question we have to ask is, what is the process after a vicious attack like this from both Carlos Ruiz and Ricardo Clark? What do you guys go through to determine what sort of suspension is necessary?
Well, Greg and Shep, the disciplinary committee will attempt to do as thorough a job collecting information about this incident. Obviously, we will look at all videotape available. We will even call for what's known as the melt, which is the possible TV angles from cameras that were not used during TV. We will interview both players. We'll interview the game officials. We may interview other players who are on the field, and we will debate it over the next day or two. The members of the disciplinary committee have all different backgrounds in the game, both as field players, goalkeepers, referees, administrators, and we'll come up with what the best decision in this instance that will reflect the nature of what took place on the field, and hopefully serve as a method to prevent other players from considering such an action.
All right, well, it doesn't sound like a very enviable position to put yourselves in, but thank you, Dr. Mack, for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
Dr. Joe Macknick from MLS joining us right there to talk about Ricardo Clark and the suspension from his vicious attack on Carlos Ruiz this past weekend. In the absence of Ricardo Clark, Houston's MLS Cup bid this year to be repeat champions certainly takes a hit. Ricardo is obviously one of the top 2-3 best holding midfielders in the league, along with Shauri Joseph and Pablo Mastroeni, and this is a big void they're going to have to fill.
And he's great at kicking a player when that player's down on the ground. He didn't miss. But Dominic Kinnear, we talked about it earlier, Greg, the start to the season for Houston, then they got on fire, then they backed off a little bit. They're getting on a roll again. I think he's definitely a candidate for Coach of the Year, and he's got players like Mulrooney that he could slot in.
Yeah, Richard Mulrooney obviously is a holding midfielder. Great pickup at the beginning of the season when they got him. And also, Stuart Holden could slide into the middle. Brad Davis is getting healthier again. He'll be back out on the left flank, so that's another option for them.
I love Houston. Pat Onstead in goal. They're great at the back. They have Dave Rosario coming out of the midfield, and when you need a goal, hey, little Brian Ching over there. So they have some players.
Well, okay, all those weapons, fine. But this week, where do they go? They have to play the Los Angeles Galaxy. Arguably the hottest team in the league, although DC and Chivas might have a little say about that as well. They've won 3 games in a row. They've actually been unbeaten in 4. They're only 6 points out of the 8th playoff spot. What's going on in LA?
I'm eating my words because I've been bashing the LA Galaxy for years. But you know what? Whether it's the logo or the fact that they were so out of it and now they're making a run, I sort of like them. And I like the way 2 players in particular have been playing. Kyle Martino and Klein. They've both been great. Landon Donovan, to me, still a little bit disinterested. It would be miraculous to me if they can continue and make the playoffs. It
would be miraculous. And for me, it would actually be disappointing because I have a problem with a team here that when the glare of the world was on them, they didn't step up. They didn't perform the way they were supposed to. And it says something, I think, about the American players that they haven't done that. There are rumors around LA that they like it without the pressure. They like it more. But you know what? David Beckham's not going anywhere. The pressure is staying, and it's only going to get more as more DPs show up. So if they make the playoffs, it's like giving them a free pass all of a sudden.
You know what? I'm not in the locker room. If that's true, I would agree with you 100% if the players were shrinking violets when the cameras were on. Having said that, Frankie Yallop has the great advantage of going into the locker room before their next game and say, guys, this year was a waste. You were a nightmare. You can make it all right by going out and winning the next game.
Well, the next game is against Houston this weekend, and it's not going to be easy for them, but they're only 6 points out of those playoffs. They're on a roll. The Galaxy, with or without Beckham, might make it into the playoffs. If you have any questions or thoughts about the Galaxy or about anything we've said today, you can email us at extratime@mlsnet.com. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We have grabbed the bull by the horns today. But Shep will be here, and I'll be here next week for another edition of Extra Time. Join us, and we will pick it around.